and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News Extra, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel says it's approved a plan to capture all of the Gaza Strip and expand its military offensive against Hamas. President Trump announces a 100% tariff on foreign-made movies to save Hollywood. And the British royal family join crowds and World War II veterans in London to mark 80 years since victory in Europe Day. Israel's Security Cabinet has approved a plan to expand its military offensive against Hamas and capture all of the Gaza Strip. The plan also included distributing aid through private companies, which would end a 2-month blockade that the UN said has caused severe food shortages. Earlier, I spoke to Ahmed Ben Kemshi, the Communications Director for Human Rights Watch, Middle East and North Africa Division. I asked him what needs to happen to begin helping people.
Well, clearly Israel has to lift its blockade, which again is unlawful. It is a flagrant violation of international law. It is not a legitimate military tactic. So first and foremost, Israel has to lift its blockade. And then it has to restore water and electricity access and allow in desperately needed help. Water, food, medical aid, fuel. That's what needs to happen. It's in the hands of Israel, and it needs to abide by international law at last.
To discuss this and all of today's stories, I'm joined by Dubai 92 presenter Jono Hayes and also former editor-in-chief and media strategist Michael Jabri Pickett. Thank you so much for joining me. So we just basically heard there from Ahmed before. We know Israel cut off humanitarian aid and supplies to Gaza on the 2nd of March, and this was really just a message to Hamas. What impact has this had on the people?
Well, we know that starvation is happening right before our eyes. There are thousands of children who are suffering from malnutrition, tens of thousands of Palestinians. There's not enough food. We also know that there are deep divisions within Israeli society. We know that the family members of the hostages are incredibly upset. We know that the critics, of course, are saying that there's no strategy, that there's no end game. We know that the U.S. is doing nothing to pressure the Israelis to stop the genocide. We know that there seems to be no end in sight as far as help coming from the international community. These are the issues that are happening on a daily basis for the people of Gaza, and there doesn't seem to be any end in sight.
And Jono, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has called this new Gaza offensive that's been planned and been announced a good plan. So does he believe it's actually enough to essentially defeat Hamas?
Well, he may believe that, but critics have a different opinion. It seems that this escalation of violence without any guarantee of long-term security is concerning his largest critics. There is tens of thousands of ground troops who've now gone in to Gaza as well, which would indicate that a large-scale operation is on the horizon very, very soon, which is a concern. And of course, unless this dismantles Hamas's ideology, it is pretty much a futile effort. And in fact, the going in and capturing strongholds within Gaza will not have any success without some level of diplomacy. There is no humanitarian balance, which as Michael rightly pointed out, that has not been struck at all. And there's a long-term instability risk. We are now 18 months in. We will likely be here 2 years in without any, if there's not a solid plan in place for Netanyahu to stick to, which as it seems currently, that's not the case. There's no plan.
Earlier, I actually spoke to former Israeli government spokesperson Elon Levy, who told me how the new military strategy will actually be carried out.
Well, the strategy has changed. For the last year and a half, Israel was playing a game of cat and mouse with Hamas. It sent soldiers into Gaza, they cleared an area of Hamas, and then withdrew, and Hamas came back. And it should be clear to everyone, that's no way to permanently remove Hamas from power. So the new Israeli military strategy says This war has gone on for too long. It must end, and it must end with Hamas's defeat. So Israel will send in the military, fight Hamas, and then hold territory so Hamas cannot recapture it. And when Israel is able to capture the entire territory and remove Hamas from power, then we can start to talk about a day after plan once the regime that perpetrated the October 7th massacre and is still holding 24 hostages who are still alive is removed from power. Then we can move on.
So there we are, Michael. That was Elon Levy speaking to me. And I thought it was really interesting because I said, what is the plan once you go into Gaza? And like he said, the day after plan will come eventually. He also spoke a little bit to me about de-radicalizing people who are living within Gaza and under Hamas. But once again, where's diplomacy here?
There is no diplomacy, certainly none from the Israelis. I would argue that you look at the number of dead Palestinian civilians versus the number of dead Israeli civilians. You can't even compare the numbers. So when they talk about defeating Hamas, what is it exactly that they're talking about? If you have 1.5 million Palestinians in Gaza, what number are we talking about that are actually active members of Hamas? 10,000, maybe 15,000. And so what you need from the superpower in any conflict is you need them to come to the table. You need them to talk about what it is that we need, what it is that you need, and let's end the killing. But I am a firm believer that what Israel says and what their spokespeople say is actually not what they want. This, to me, is a land grab, that there's no way that they're going to go in and ever give up land. It was 20 years ago this year that the settlers that were in Gaza, the Israeli settlers, left. And I think that there's a decent number of Israelis who regret that move and who would be desperate to go back in, take Gaza and keep it and not give it back.
It's interesting to hear Elon Levy say that this war must end, but as we said, without the actual clear post-conflict strategy, that end is not in sight. Without the actual powers that be, and we've mentioned this before in the show, without anyone actually getting involved, it seems like they have almost a do-whatever-you-want attitude at the moment on the ground. And the inclination of that it's going to further deepen. Thousands of troops on the way and indicate that problem is going to get worse before it gets better. And I know that Israel's own ministers have said that this may be a long, drawn-out and drawn-out war towards peace, but where the peace plan is, we don't know that yet, which is unfortunate.
And what I found interesting when I was speaking to Elon a little bit earlier is I spoke to him about the deep divisions in Israel that are now coming to the surface. A lot of people who have family who are hostages, they really want this war to stop. They want their family to be brought back. People are growing wary of this within Israel itself.
They are. And I don't know that you can go for 18 months and consistently decimate the enemy and people back home think, oh, this is going well. This is the way that it should be going. Israel also, I think, has other issues at play, right? They're vowing to attack the Houthis in Yemen. They're vowing to attack Iran. They're sending missiles into the south of Lebanon. They're sending missiles into Syria as well. They seem to be constantly on a war footing. And that is not going to play well in the international community. But the international community doesn't seem to want to treat Israel the same way that they would treat any other aggressor. They're quite critical in Europe, for instance, of what it is that Vladimir Putin is doing. And they're prepared to stand up and support the Ukrainians. But where is that same support for the Palestinians?
The only saving grace in this is the United Nations have said that the basic principles of humanitarian aid are not being adhered to by this plan, and therefore that they will not cooperate with that. So that may be the only saving grace. They've amounted it to political blackmail, for want of a better description. And as Israel have cut off all deliveries of humanitarian aid, the saving grace here may be that the UN says this is not actually the way towards peace, and that therefore we would find another solution towards this. But for the moment, Netanyahu is powering through with what seems to be a plan with no actual outcome at the end of it.
And also, interestingly, the International Court of Justice was hearing about this blockade, and a majority of the countries really slammed Israel for not letting aid go into Gaza. So maybe you're right, maybe it is the NGOs and the aid agencies that meant you know, people can get medical supplies and just the basic food in. But yeah, an extremely difficult situation right now. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Let's turn our attention to another story now. And President Donald Trump has announced there will be a 100% tariff on all movies produced in foreign lands. He made the announcement on Truth Social, and that was last night. He said the US film industry was dying a very fast death due to the incentives that other countries were offering to draw American filmmakers. He added this is a concerted effort by other nations and therefore a national security threat. Earlier, I spoke to Al Arabia's senior correspondent and presenter, Karina Kamel, who told me how the UK government has enticed film production into Britain.
Countries like the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand have indeed been reviving their own industries or perhaps attracting investment to their own industries through tax incentives. And the UK has been particularly successful in this area. So here in the United Kingdom, successive governments, Conservative and Labour, have been cutting costs, slashing taxes, providing a number of incentives. And they have resulted, these measures, in companies coming to the UK and choosing to film their movies here and also do the post-production on their films here, the visual effects. We've got Pinewood Studios. The Star Wars franchise has been filmed in the United Kingdom. A number of others, some of the Marvel films have been filmed here. We know Australia and New Zealand are very popular destinations, and the industries have grown massively over the past few years in Australia and New Zealand due to those incentives offered by those governments. So one way to attract, shall we say, movie making back to the United States would be a tax cut or some kind of tax incentive, some kind of a subsidy perhaps, some kind of easing of regulation. But Donald Trump has perhaps resorted or turned to his favorite tool, which is tariffs rather.
So, Jono, we have seen this massive setback in Hollywood over a whole lot of things. It's been COVID, there's obviously been the LA fires, a writer's strike. What is another way of trying to claw back money to get Hollywood booming again?
It does seem that way, and I think the phrase that has been touted, make movies American again, has been floating around today. But we have seen, as you mentioned, rightly so, just after the pandemic, we had the writer's strike, we've had the fires. Everything has kind of gone against the industry that's there, but also its lack of competitiveness has really played into the fold here. And as we heard just a second ago from Karina, there is countries that are offering massive tax breaks, huge financial incentives for movies to be shot in their locations and on their soil, which unfortunately the US has been unable to deal with. Hollywood is up against it at the moment, and it seems that the idea behind this would be that these tariffs would be an incentive towards the unfair incentives that are currently being offered by other countries in a hope that you might coax some of that industry back to the US once again. But it is very difficult in an industry whereby it is such a mega million and billion dollar industry that you're trying to save money where you can in order to make movies that may no longer be box office successes. And the Trump administration thinks, well, we'll put a tariff on that, hope for the best that they come back over again and see how it goes. It will be hugely damaging, I imagine, to industries internationally if they can't distribute their movies in the US. That is where the problem will be.
Yeah, exactly. And we were speaking earlier that how intertwined everything is when it comes to making a film. You might write it in one country, film it in one country, post-production in one country. I wonder if this has sort of come into the mindset of how these tariffs might work.
Well, I liken it to the situation with the US, Mexico, and Canada and car manufacturing. As we were discussing, you know, some parts are assembled in Mexico, some parts are assembled in Canada, and then they're shipped to the States, and then they're shipped back to one of those countries for final assembling. And that is very much, as you were saying, what happens with the film industry. Is a script is written, talent comes from different parts of the world, CGI stuff is done in different parts of the world, location, the film where it's shot. But for me, much like with the tariffs, I think this is self-inflicted by the American film industry, by Hollywood, because if they were comfortable taking a little less profit, if they were comfortable paying whatever the state of California requires, then they could keep it all in Hollywood. But the actors and the producers and the studios all want a little bit more, which means they then are on the hunt for where they can go to film something that's going to be cheaper. So a lot of these a lot of TV shows, for instance, are filmed in Canada, right up in Vancouver. And a lot of them will go to UK or to Eastern Europe as well, where things are noticeably cheaper and they can continue to reap the profits. But the issue that Donald Trump has with the tariffs that he wants to impose, or that he has imposed, is self-inflicted because he thinks this is essential. And I think the same issue is happening with the film industry, where there wouldn't need to be the same incentives if everybody was comfortable taking a little bit less. Do you really need to be paid $25 million for that film? Maybe you could do it for a little bit less.
And again, I don't know if they can compete with the actual hard cash that's been handed over for going on location and filming. However, it has been a pre-election mandate of Donald Trump that he would look at Hollywood.
Oh,
and he
I
would,
didn't know that.
yeah, well, because beforehand, ahead of the inauguration as well, he'd already appointed 3 people who were going to be in charge, special ambassadors, somewhat of the movie industry, to promote business, to get opportunities back to Hollywood again, to try and get that inward investment of movies to the area. Unfortunately, he picked John Voight, Mel Gibson, and Sylvester Stallone, which may not have been the most happening kids on the block right now. So it may have kind of lost its momentum a little bit with who was picked for that.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
Kind of has been, and it is a little bit unfortunate. But I do wonder about something. So, you know, the film industry, we saw Tom Cruise do Mission Impossible, where he climbed down the Burj Khalifa. James Bond, obviously, that's a classic UK film. Pinewood Studios is normally where that happens. I wonder what's going to happen in the future, where films are going to be made. And is it worth all this stress? I'm not sure.
I would also add that classic, I think it was Fast and the Furious 6, filmed in Abu Dhabi.
I mean, classic might be a stretch, but yes, it was filmed in Abu Dhabi.
Yes.
And we've many times discussed the benefits of AI on this show, and how AI is kind of where we're moving towards. And it seems that if the movie industry is taking a leaf out of everyone else's book, you will be able to do these on green screens. You will take a green screen studio and make yourself in pretty much any city in the world. And then now you encounter a situation whereby, okay, we're putting a tariff on you going to do a movie in Venice or in Rome. No longer a concern, as you can record that with AI and the addition of that on a green screen anywhere in Hollywood. If that becomes the case, I think then you've got an argument. If we're at that point where it's already possible, which I think it close to is, then I think now this will be the administration's argument that, yes, we can do it all in Hollywood, do it ourselves.
You're absolutely right. If you can do a green screen to show you're in space, then surely you can do one to show that you're in New York when really you're in LA.
You would think, but we don't know if this is going to affect Netflix, streaming services. We don't know if it's just going to be box office movies. And again, box office movies are few and far between these days. There's 1 or 2 being released every month, whereas before it was every single week there was a brand new box office movie with huge Hollywood actors in there. That's not happening.
And I would say that this is another indication that there's absolutely zero strategy coming out of the White House, because it's a different day, and so there's a different distraction. And this seems to be it's Donald Trump thinking that this is what's most important today.
For him, it may be. And this is the case of he wants to make movies great again. So maybe that's Monday's topic, was just make movies great again. We'll be on to a brand new one by tomorrow. But it seems that he wants the inward investment into movies. If this works, and it turns full circle. But we'd already said Hollywood was dead a long time ago.
But imagine forming a committee and having people from Hollywood come in, having other film industries from around the world come in, have a conversation, have a summit. Like, bring the people who are actually in the business and say, what is it that we need to sort out? What are the priorities for the American film institutes in America, in Hollywood? And what are the priorities for some of the other ones around the world? How is it that we can work together? And of course, there's none of that. Instead, it's one guy without a tie walking away from the helicopter saying, this is what I think should happen today.
And you've got to be right, what you said in regards to it being financial. It has to be that. It has to be surely the fact that it's so cheap for them to do this abroad and to move the entire production to there is surely the incentive why companies are not doing this on home soil if it's an American movie, right?
Absolutely. I think from the podcasts that I've listened to, I've heard so many celebrities talk about how it's cheaper to go to Eastern Europe, or even to Western Europe for that matter, compared to Hollywood. And their gripe, and of course they live in California, so they understand some of the issues that are at play and some of the taxes that the governor has levied. But they know that these are realities in California. But if they were to take a little bit less, I'm sure that there could be some sort of compromise. But I don't think anybody's comfortable taking anything less.
And I don't know, because, you know, for me, Hollywood is iconic. So can these big blockbuster films still exist without the UK if they look, the US, if they're looking to...
And again, I think this is going to come down to distribution. But if we look at the Bollywood movie scene, which is absolutely huge, and the budgets there trounce anything that's been released in the US or the UK in a number of years. And maybe this is where the focus now shifts to, and maybe the ship has sailed. Unfortunately for the Trump administration, it may already be too late for Hollywood, which seems to have been a dead duck for a number of years since COVID. It hasn't really rallied. And yes, you could argue that it was to do with the pandemic and the writers' strike, but there has to be other factors at play as well. I think Michael has rightly pointed out that if you can do this a lot cheaper somewhere else and provide people with the same level of entertainment, then why not do exactly that?
No, it's going to be an interesting watch for sure. The end is not being written yet, so we'll wait and see. Thank you for your thoughts on that. Let's move on to another story, but we're going to actually stick with President Donald Trump, because the US president has said he's directing his administration to reopen the notorious Alcatraz prison. The prison was closed back in 1963 due to the crumbling infrastructure and high repair and operation costs. In a post on Truth Social site, he said the prison will house America's most ruthless and violent offenders. Okay, Alcatraz, Hollywood, they're kind of linked. There's been lots of films about Alcatraz, but what is the history of Alcatraz, and why does President Trump want to reopen it?
So I am an Alcatraz buff. I visited the prison about 40 years ago. And it's wonderful because you can put on an old-style Walkman. I'm not sure if you remember the Walkmans, John.
Yeah, even I do. Come on.
And you could walk around the prison, and as you're walking around the prison, they'll have actual former prisoners and former guards narrating what would have happened during the course of a day in the life of a prison, or in the life of a prisoner. They would show you the cell where the Clint Eastwood character from Escape from Alcatraz stayed, and they still had the stuffed fake head that he used to fool the guards. It is, for someone such as myself, I became interested in all things sort of 1920s gangsterish, and of course this is where they ended up. Al Capone ended up here. There's
Machine Gun Kelly.
Machine Gun Kelly, Birdman of Alcatraz. One of my favorites is a gentleman by the name of Alvin Creepy Karpis, who was Canadian, who actually spent more time as a prisoner in Alcatraz than anyone else, 26 years. It's also interesting that there's a connection, a more personal connection, the prison to Donald Trump. And that is, since it was closed, as you mentioned, in 1963, that was ordered by the Attorney General, who at the time was Robert Kennedy. And of course, his son is part of the Trump cabinet.
That's absolutely fascinating. I didn't know.
Full circle.
That. I know, full circle, right? It always works like that in life. But we've seen hundreds of migrants actually, Jono, deported to El Salvador, the super prison, and that's by Donald Trump's administration. Do you think reopening a prison like Alcatraz could save on deportation costs and also the legal headaches that the administration are facing?
So the top line answer in this is no. It's not going to cut costs. It's to reopen, it's going to be hugely expensive. And as you've been someone who's been there, Michael, you'll be aware that it is a dilapidated building, and the system that it was a member of no longer exists. So it's going to require a lot of money. And logistically, it's very complex to reopen a prison like Alcatraz as well. It doesn't reduce any of the legal complexity, and in fact, it doesn't reduce any of the costs that are involved as well. The burden and the cost actually may be quite significantly more when the end numbers come to fruition. I don't think that this is necessarily about a cost-cutting measure. This is a symbol, and Alcatraz in itself is a symbol of strength. It's deterrence, it's accountability as well. This is a fly in the face of the previous administration's soft on crime approach, and Donald Trump has seen this as a big testament and almost a monument to crime prevention, reopening this and having it there as a deterrent is what the Trump administration wants to have seen done. So is it going to save costs? No. Is it going to be functional? Well, the idea has been mocked, as you can imagine, across the board. But the rising crime rate in the US indicates that Americans feel like something needs to be done. This has been contended as a serious solution, and transforming it back into a working prison and reclaiming it from tourism, although as expensive as it may be, it is said to be a meaningful use. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with it being a meaningful use when you could probably have built an equally impressive, if not way more impressive building from scratch and have had the same effect.
Well, by the numbers that we've seen, it generates $60 billion a year.
Yeah, I was just saying that 1.6 million visitors every single year go there. That is a big amount.
So you could, I'm not sure if a billion or million, I'm not sure which I said. I think I said billion, and I think it's million, 60 million. But you could use that to build other prisons if you needed to. But certainly, you cannot take something that is this old and in such poor condition and repurpose that without a lot of work and a lot of expense and a lot of time and a lot of money. It's just not going to happen, as Jono said. It's certainly not going to happen, and it's certainly not worthwhile.
And you think early 20th century, it's been around since. So we think it closed in 1963. It was not a new building in 1963. It was not in its infancy of its use at that stage. It had already been used, I think, previously as a lookout fort before that as well. So it has been around for a very, very long time. And as you know, to repurpose any building is almost more hassle than it's worth than to just knock it down. I understand the symbol of defiance, of strength, of security that it embodies. But I do think as a tourist attraction, it's far more attractive to go along to.
I was also just having a look at some of the Alcatraz, and I didn't realize this, but it's literally so difficult to have. Only 36 prisoners apparently ever tried to escape, and a lot of it was unsuccessful. And in 1962, 3 prisoners vanished, and there's still a lot of conspiracy theories around that. So I think Alcatraz is something that does fascinate everyone, and Donald Trump sort of brought it back into, our mind's eye again.
So there's one rumor, I'm not sure if it gets to the level of conspiracy theories, but so bodies were never found. When they did escape, when they were off the island. Now, the water's incredibly cold and the currents are quite strong. So the thinking is that they got swept out to sea. But the one rumor that you heard, or at least that I would read about and sort of romanticize, is that every year on the anniversary of the escape, the warden would receive a postcard from one of the men.
Okay.
Maybe not. But I think if you're looking for that prison where you say this is where we'll send you if you don't behave, Rikers Island surely does that job already. I don't think Alcatraz is going to add or take away from that. So I don't know if it's going to be a deterrent.
Now, one thing that's completely outside the realm of possibilities, but I'm going to throw it out there right now, is you don't need to repair it. But because it's so difficult to get off the island without a boat, if you were to swim it, just put everybody there. You don't have to worry about putting
And they can rebuild it.
Well, they could if you wanted that.
No, I'm just saying that maybe it's a wild suggestion.
But they would not be able to escape. And if they did, they'd be taking their life in their own hands. Now, for Donald Trump, it would be the perfect idea about violent offenders who have to swim across dangerous waters, shark-infested dangerous waters. It would almost be like a reality TV show for the man who used to be a reality TV star.
The Survivor concept may or may not be picked up by a TV channel.
Well, there we are. You're not fired. I don't know what. I never watched this TV show. It was The Apprentice, right?
It was The Apprentice.
Yeah, there we are. Okay, and we're going to move on now. And let's go to London. And thousands of people in London have joined the royal family to watch events commemorating 80 years since victory in Europe Day. The King, Queen Camilla, and the Prince and Princess of Wales watched a military parade alongside World War II veterans. Earlier in the day, British actor Timothy Spall kicked off proceedings by reading out Winston Churchill's famous speech from the 8th of May 1945. Take a listen.
This is not a victory of a party or of any class. It's a victory of the great British nation as a whole. We were the first in this ancient island to draw the sword against tyranny. Every man, woman, and child in the country had no thought of quitting the struggle. When shall the reputation and faith of this generation of men and women fail?
Jono, that was a powerful rendition of that iconic speech. Obviously happened 80 years ago. I feel like that was quite a moment in history.
Well, to see it recreated by Anthony Spall, who of course in 2010 played Winston Churchill in the King's speech, I think was quite a moment as well. And I think because we're at the 80th anniversary, the number of veterans are now dwindling to almost countable on fingers and toes. So I feel like unless it's immortalised now, it will be very difficult to have that celebration for the veterans going forward any further than the next 10 years. We may or may not have a 90-year celebration for it, but I feel that there is at least now still people alive who remember 1945, who remember that exact moment, and that's why it's so important to mark it and to also have the pomp and pageantry that goes along with it. But amazing to see them all being completely lit up with guards and with everything that went along with it today as well. Beautiful to see and impressive.
Oh, there's nothing like pomp and pageantry. I always think that. When I lived in London, I absolutely just thought it was, no one does it like the Brits. I'm telling you, they're the best at it. But the royal family were in attendance, Michael, and gave the crowds below the traditional welcome, of course, from the balcony at Buckingham Palace. It is remarkable.
It is, and you had 3 generations that were up there. And I think for the Windsor family, there's something a little bit special there, because one of the moments, I think, that stayed with Queen Elizabeth when she was quite young was during the Blitz. And the family stayed in London. And then after the war, she was out there visiting people as much as she could. And I think for the family, it represents something, a moment that really solidified, I think, their place in the public eye. And I also believe that it's a great example of, when you knew who the bad guys were and the world came together to fight against injustice. And we look around the world today and there doesn't seem to be that same understanding about what's good and what's bad. So while I understand that there might not be survivors of veterans for future, or there might be fewer and fewer, and so we might not have a 90th, I do think that it's important that it continue to be celebrated, because it's one of those shining moments in, I think, modern civilization, where we realize what we could accomplish when the good guys came together.
Yeah, and I think exactly that. It felt very much them and us of more than anything else, and that was what was being celebrated, whereby if we were to call a truce in any of the conflicts which are taking place today, it would be difficult to have anything similar, because you wonder who was them and who was us and who was on which side.
And it's quite amazing, isn't it? Because a lot of what the rhetoric was today, when I listened to the people who were veterans or people in the army now, what they really concentrated on was the fact that there is a war in Europe, and really this is a reminder that you can never stop protecting peace, which I thought was something so true, and this is a reminder of that 80 years old. But Jono, 2 royals weren't in attendance, and that was Prince Harry and Prince Andrew.
Well, Prince Harry is no longer a working royal, so he gets off scot-free for this one. However, we've seen him in an interview last week where he's very graciously said that he now forgives everybody.
And wants to reconcile.
And wants to reconcile and wants to work towards that as well. So maybe the money is potentially drying up right now, or the book deals aren't quite as lucrative as he expected. But he has reached out, extended an olive branch. He discussed in that interview whereby his father, King Charles, no longer speaks to him as well. So I'm guessing that's a difficult and a bitter pill to swallow. And I'm sure on occasions like this, where the royal family are showing their true colours, quite literally, for the entire world to see, he will feel a little bit left out. And I think there was no coincidence that interview happened 1 week before VE Day.
And obviously he was an Apache pilot, so he actually served in the British Army too. So it's something that's probably more close to Prince Harry's heart. But I did find it weird, just going back to the BBC interview he did it at that time, but he also seemed to want to reconcile, but then also was a little bit disgruntled discriminatory about the family and his father's cancer diagnosis. It kind of didn't make so much sense to me in many ways.
It's very difficult to know what the narrative is with Prince Harry. So I think that's probably where a lot of this comes into play. And I think it's going to be tricky to try and figure that out. And that's what the issue is.
I also find it interesting because we can see so much on social media. When you look at his wife's social media accounts and the podcasts that she'll appear on, where she will talk about how this is one of the best moments of her life right now. And yet, publicly, her husband is talking about this not being one of the best moments. There seems to almost be a bit of a disconnect there.
I think the public would love if there was a disconnect there. I think a lot of the British public certainly would make you think that they would love there to be a disconnect there, and they would love for that story to end differently. Prince Andrew not being on site, though, that is also, he's been removed and relieved of his royal duties since 2019. Queen Elizabeth, the late Queen Elizabeth, stripped all of his military honours, all of his titles, his patronages, everything has been gone since 2022, since the controversy around his friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, but also, of course, the sexual assault allegations that were there towards him. So both of them were not in attendance at it, and from what it appears, won't be in attendance at any of the royal events in the near future, it seems.
No, definitely. Yeah, I mean, every family has their difficulties. They're just being aired out in public. And Michael, just quickly, King Charles will be travelling to Canada soon to meet the recently elected Mark Carney.
He will indeed. In fact, he'll be giving the throne speech to Parliament on May 27th. Normally that's done by the monarch's representative in Canada, the Governor General, but he'll be the one. I think this will be his 20th visit to Canada, and he'll be the one giving the speech before Parliament opens, which is essentially outlining what are the government's priorities. And Mark Carney has said that it's a moment right now, especially when Mark Carney is supposed to be meeting with Donald Trump tomorrow, it's a moment right now that is a gesture, and it's a meaningful gesture. It's to show that Canada is a sovereign nation. After all, King Charles is the head of the Canadian government. And it's important, much like with the pomp ceremony of the monarchy, these moments and the ceremony that goes with them, I think it's that history and that tradition is very important to institutions like Parliament.
No, absolutely. And now we finally reached that stage in the show where Jono and Michael, you've come up with a couple of quirky stories of the day. Jono, we're going to start with you, and it's a list of the top tech arguments that have been revealed. I don't know, top 10 tech. No, I was going to say top 10 tech tips was what he wanted me to say, but I actually can't say it.
Top 10 tech tips.
Yeah, no, you can. Yeah.
So it seems that if we are looking for divorce on the horizon for Harry and Meghan, he might want to leave his chargers around the house a little bit more often, as that's one of the main culprits.
What, like phone chargers?
Phone chargers, yeah, anything, gadgets lying around the house in general. Also, it seems that using your phone at the dinner table is one of the issues that a lot of couples
But
have.
why would you want to look at your phone while you're having your food?
We can.
Okay, we'll discuss that later.
That.
Yeah.
Volume of music and being on your gaming console too much has also led to divorces.
But tell me about, you were talking to me about the volume on the TV, and I'd never heard this before, but you and Michael agreed on this. It has to be on a certain number, an odd number,
well, there's
or
two
even
types
number?
of, in my opinion, there's two types of people. There are people who have to have the channel on odd numbers or even numbers for the volume, and then there are psychopaths. So that was my argument, and I think this is something that anyone who's done when you were younger, if you stepped over an even or uneven number of cracks in the pavement, you'll have the same issue whereby you feel you have to have the volume on a certain number in order for that to be okay. Likewise, I think that would be a big bone of contention. If there was somebody in my house that was not okay with the volume being on a specific number, I'd have an issue with that. And I know that I don't know if it's something that you would have a problem with as well. But
my wife and I have been married 34 years. We're past that. But when I'm home alone,
you're in separate rooms now. No, I'm joking.
But I actually, there are studies that show that that's actually good for a healthy marriage.
Yeah, I agree.
But I am very much of the opinion that when I'm home alone, I will. My OCD will come through loud and clear, especially with volume and subtitles.
So what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to, and this is not me, this is an expert says this, you're supposed to discuss household duties, tasks, and little quirks that you may have before you actually get into a serious relationship, and definitely before you end up getting married. 56% of people cited in their divorce, 56% of people said that it was to do with their household habits or hobbies or other things that they're doing within their house. And I'm sure that out of those 56%, 100% was about the dishwasher, because this is one of the big issues of contention within any household, I think, is the dishwasher as well. You either care deeply about how well it's stacked and how beautiful it has to be before the tablet goes in and the switch comes on, or again, you're a psychopath.
I think I'm just a psychopath because I think you could just stack everything in the dishwasher and switch it on. I don't care if the TV's on 100 or 10.
Yeah.
I'm very relaxed about that sort of stuff. So I wonder if I've got a problem.
The two examples you used were both even numbers.
Yes, they were. Yes,
Maybe
yes.
you do it subconsciously.
No, I definitely
You didn't
don't
say
do
10 and
it.
11.
No, I definitely don't do that. I'm going to be honest with you. I feel like I'm... No.
Avoid a divorce, they say in advance you should talk to the person that you're moving in with and have that conversation out and maybe do a list of pros and cons and do's and don'ts so that you don't end up in the divorce courts saying that it's because he took the remote control or she took the remote control off me or she left my charger lying around the house.
I just can't believe
Or you
that.
have it written into the prenup.
Yeah.
Solves the problem.
Okay, so there we are. If you're going to get married, there's lots of things to discuss. Remotes are apparently one of them. Okay. British woman, now moving on to you, Michael, 115 years old, oldest living person. Pretty remarkable.
So I'm usually not a big fan of the World Guinness record stories, but this one is, in my mind, entertaining, not so much because of what she's achieved. Ethel Caterham, 115, as you said, living in the UK. It's because I like to look at when they were born and then everything that they would have seen during their life. So she was born in 1909. She is the last person to have lived under the reign of King Edward VII. She was born during the construction of the Titanic.
Wow.
And she was born 19 days after the US military purchased its first airplane from two brothers, Wilbur and Orville Wright. And she's also achieved a fair bit in her personal life. She stopped driving only at 97, quite the accomplishment. She had 2 children, 3 grandchildren, and 5 great-grandchildren.
Amazing, isn't it?
It's incredible. I think it's maybe too old. And I've thought this before. I've seen interviews where people are at the age where they're already centenarians and they think, who's going to go and say goodbye to me when I'm gone?
Yeah.
Because all of your friends are already dead because you're 115.
Well, the good news is she has children and grandchildren, so
And
maybe there'll be at
great-grandchildren.
least 3 people at the funeral.
There's been a study to find out that actually if you do live to be over 100, you're most likely to be friends with women because that's 85% of people who live to be over 100 are female, in fact, and just 15% are men. So more women live to be over 100, so she's in good company.
That's because we don't worry about the volume on the TV, and we also don't worry about the dishwasher, so we're not sweating the small stuff. One thing I liked about her is I saw an interview with her and she said the reason why she's lived so long is it's because she doesn't argue, she listens to what everyone says but does her own thing anyway. I was like, yeah, there we are, that's it.
You should
I'm living
live to
by
be
that
150.
rule. Yeah, thank you. So thanks to today's guest, Dubai 92 presenter John O'Hayes and former editor-in-chief and media strategist Michael Jabri Pickett. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Israel says it's approved a plan to capture all of the Gaza Strip and expand its military offensive against Hamas. President Donald Trump announces a 100% tariff on foreign-made movies to save Hollywood. And the British royal family joined crowds and World War II veterans in London to mark 80 days since Victory in Europe Day. And that's all from us on W News Extra. G&T with Tom Burgess-Watson is coming up next. Goodbye and thank you for joining us.